Okay, I think we're ready. Everyone is taking their seats. Good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the launch event for the Union of European Clubs. My name is Mehreen. I'm going to be guiding you through a very packed program today. I'm glad you could all join us. I think we have representatives from around 50 clubs, small clubs in Europe, representatives from the European institutions, various stakeholders in football governance, members of the press, who I hope will stick around until the end. I'm very glad you could join us. I think this is a very interesting time and an interesting intervention with the launch of the UEC in a very timely and topical debate about the future of football governance. Maybe some caveats to begin with. I don't really have any dogs in this fight apart from being a football fan of an apparently big club based in London that wears blue but is trying very best right now to maybe lose the status of big club, but we're not going to mention that. Some housekeeping. We are live streamed on YouTube, so I think that means no swearing or profanities. If anyone wants translation, we have translation in English and Spanish. A bit later on, one of our participants is going to be in Spanish, so you can pick up a headset from just at the back of the room. We're going to be here for a while. I hope you stick with us. It is my pleasure to announce our first speaker and a series of speakers, which will then followed by a panel and a closing event. He is a long-standing European official and is currently occupying the post of Vice President of the European Commission in charge for the European way of life. I'm delighted for Margaritis Schinas to kick us off today.
Dear friends, chers amis, I'm truly delighted to be here today in this launch of the Union of European Clubs. There is one thing all of us here have in common, and this is that we all share the passion for promoting what is now universally called as the European model of sport. I'm grateful to the organizers for inviting me to kickstart this event with this opening remark. And I would also like to concentrate these few minutes in talking about something which is important and not always available in big quantities. It's rather in a short supply, and this is the topic of European unity. European unity in sport. This is the topic I would like to focus. Those of you who know me well know that other than a European regulator, I'm also, from my early years, an avid football fan. Unlike Marine, I'm not ashamed to say which club I'm standing for. This is the Aris Thessaloniki, whom I see delighted to be represented today here. And I'm very, very nervous because the season in Greece is reaching its climax and the team is doing quite well at UCLA. So I hope we will also be present in next year's European competitions. Now, speaking about European competitions, it is my firm belief that these should not be the exclusivity of a small elite of privileged clubs who keeps on playing and playing the whole football season against each other at the expense of smaller clubs who in fact are the real pillar of the European sport model. A bright example of our vision of this European model of sport, where small is beautiful, is what the Royal Union Saint-Gilloise has achieved. A team that in the season 2020-2021 was still competing in Belgian second division, just 2 days ago was about to reach the Europe League semi-finals. On Thursday night, I had the chance, together with Alex, to witness this amazing effort. And I'm sure that next year, Alex, you will do even better. What a great history this club has, and what a great story writing with the players funds and staff in this important European city, which is Brussels. So our institutions, our organizations, the European Union, the Union Saint-Gilloise, have something of a motto in common, and this is l'union fait la force. The unity, it's the unity that makes strength. Dear friends, in my role as Vice President of the European Commission, also in charge of sport, I am an unerring supporter and champion of Europe's solidarity and the values-based model of sport. In Europe, we are more than a geography. We are more than commercial profit and much more than entertainment. We are a values-driven society. As the responsible governing partner, a valued partner for us, UEFA should ensure that the commercial success of the elite level supports all the other levels, less profitable competitions, development projects, amateur football, smaller teams. UEFA also ensures that the governance model is and remains inclusive, and all stakeholders are working together in unity towards the bigger picture, not just their own specific or sectoral agendas. Within this European model, local football clubs contribute to the cohesion and the fabric of our society and nurture inclusiveness, fairness, and unity in our continent. This European unity and togetherness were certainly what I witnessed when I kick-started also the inaugural Convention on the Future of European Football in Nyon back in September 2021 with many of you present. And it is certainly how European football has come together even stronger in opposition to the shameless Super League breakaway attempt of the last years. From our side, as EU policymakers actively working and shaping EU sport policy, one, if not the top of our priorities, is to protect and promote this European way, the European model of sport. A model where all stakeholders, and that includes all clubs, whether big, medium, or small, are heard and treated equally within an overall ecosystem that functions for all and serves our societies and communities. The European Club Association, the ECA, has recently taken steps to enhance its governance structure. This is a welcome development. As you know, we welcome transparent, inclusive, and constructive dialogue with all representative stakeholders who have an interest in and commitment to improving football governance. We also commend your objectives as Union of European Clubs, which you are about to launch. You should also take credit for your commitment to solidarity and unity. Solidarity does not only mean preserving the vital link between professional football and grassroots. It also means more sustainability and more balance, competitive balance between and across all layers of the sports pyramid. This is what will ultimately benefit European football as a whole. It is also crucial to recognize that solidarity requires a similar, genuine commitment from all stakeholders, European, of course, but not only. Major leading domestic competition organizers also have an important role to play in this regard. And I would like to take the opportunity of today's launch to reiterate the interest that we attribute to issues like transparency, meritocracy, and the constant fight against corruption in competitive European league football. Competitive balance is indeed one of these challenges that European football must face collectively. And let me add that it is also of paramount importance that stakeholder organizations remain committed to make sure that this beautiful game that passions millions of our citizens works for all and reflects who we are, the model of society we stand for as Europeans. On behalf of the Commission, I therefore encourage you all to take the opportunity of today to act in good faith and in full partnership, strengthening and defending the foundations of the European football pyramid we are all so lucky to have in Europe. The joint declaration adopted by domestic leagues and European football stakeholders last week in Prague pays a well-deserved tribute to what has made football Europe's #1 success story and one of our biggest quality passports globally. The answer to fragmentation and elitism is not more fragmentation, but unity. As they say, Alex, at Parc du Dain, c'est l'union, et nous portons l'emblème de l'union. Thank you all, good luck.
Thank you very much, Margaritis, for getting us going. I'm now going to introduce another representative of an EU institution, the European Parliament, which is just across the road. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Tomasz Frankowski, who's himself a former professional footballer who represented Poland. Tomasz is also a member of the European Parliament. He authored the eponymous Frankowski report about EU sports policy and various ways. Most outspoken voices in the Brussels ecosystem against the Super League and the idea to hold a World Cup every 2 years. Tomasz, I welcome you to the stage.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of football, it is an honor to be here with such distinguished guests and speakers. Vice President of the Commission, General Secretary of Union European Clubs, many friends of EU sport policy I can see in the room. I want to first congratulate all the people, managers, players, coaches, staff, fans working in the football in the room. Whether you have had a good season or hoping for a better one, your commitment to the sport of football in your local communities is valuable and important. As many of you know, we have also had a busy couple of seasons as EU sport policy makers. As you have mentioned, I'm Tomasz Frankowski, former professional football player and now member of the European Parliament. As a player, I was lucky enough to represent my country, Poland, and to play in the clubs in league across Europe and the world, including in England, France, Spain, Japan, and United States. As a player, I was lucky enough to, I have great experiences and great memories from my football career. And my career as a player also gives me great motivations for what I do in my current role as member of the European Parliament. In Parliament, I try to be a champion of EU values and sport policy. With my fellow MEPs, we are working to promote European values and objectives in sport. I am pleased to say that we cooperate closely with the European Commission in these efforts and objectives. We protect the solidarity model of European sport from threats like a Super League. Football is a social good for all, not just for few elite clubs' owner profits. We fund projects in local areas across Europe and anti-discrimination and social inclusion. Football is a powerful force for good in our societies and communities. We call for human rights to be respected by countries hosting major international sport events. Football can help to spread fundamental values wherever it goes. And of course, we are highly interested in good governance in European sport. I see good governance as the backbone of the European football model. People have to be able to trust that proper democratic and representative process are being followed so that they no decision and being taken in general interest. I want to welcome in this context the declaration of European leagues last week in Prague, supported by all the major European football stakeholders. The European Parliament EU Sport Policy report I lead on 2021 already showed us our full support for the principles outlined in the Prague Declaration: open competition, solidarity, and good governance. You, football stakeholders, have a great responsibility, even greater now when faced with challenges like breakaway Super League or trying to improve competitive balance and financial sustainability across European football. By this, I mean that all stakeholders, clubs, leagues, players, fans, national associations are properly involved in decision making. Let me also add that the European sport model's size does not matter, geographic does not matter, big or small, east or west, Serie A or Extraclasa, community youth club in Ireland or women's professional in Sweden. Everyone is part of the model. What really matters, what is most important, is that the ecosystem of the European football pyramid functions in the interest of all stakeholders, not one particular group. Solidarity and unity are the key European values that we will never allow European football and European football stakeholders to lose sight of. The UC is sitting out to represent clubs that do not feel properly represented. And it is important that these clubs are able to speak up. Other stakeholders must listen to their concerns and find a way forward together. Indeed, from my interaction with football stakeholders, I know that the forums to listen to UC exist, and the avenues that make sure you all work together in unity are there. Today is a good starting point, and I look forward to participating in further positive discussions in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tomasz. And the final of our triumvirate of sort of introductory speakers, you already heard about his club a little bit today. They're doing fantastic things over here in Brussels, and I can attest as a former resident of this city that they are the chosen club of the expat community. It's my honor to welcome Alex Muzio, who's the chairman of USD Union Saint-Gilloise. He's also a minority stakeholder in Brighton, who are also having a fantastic season over in England. Alex is going to share some of his thoughts about the experiences running USG, and he's also going to be part of a panel a bit later on where we're going to interrogate some of the issues around what it means to run a smaller club. So Alex, I welcome you to the stage.
Hello. Just a small correction to start with. I am not a minor stakeholder in Brighton. I am only Union Saint-Gilloise. I don't have the same speech experience of the two people before me, so apologies for that in advance. But that is good news for the schedule makers, because I think I will be talking for a bit less time. Look, our story at Union Saint-Gilloise is over the last 5 years, we have grown, we have improved, we have grown from a second division team. 5 years ago, last Thursday, I was at home with my son on my lap watching us play in a relegation playoff. Our goalkeeper Sauzé made a save in the 97th minute, which kept us in professional football. And today, we are obviously, we have made a lot of progress, and we were playing a Europa League quarter-final last week. I thought we played very well as well. But I fear that we're becoming somewhat of an exception, somewhat of a rarity. European football used to have a lot more movements of smaller teams becoming bigger, bigger teams becoming smaller, and I think that's a bit of a sad thing to have happened. As soon as Gareth was in touch with me about this project, I was very interested. I'm a big football lover, big football fan my whole life, and I am, personally concerned about how football is progressing in Europe over the last 20 years. I do think that we should be very pleased, all of the people in this room, that the Super League project was launched as it was, in such a poorly constructed, poorly conceived way. It has given us all a real opportunity to actually try to change what's been happening. Because for many, many years without the Super League project, the big clubs dominated the format, they dominated the way that the distribution was done. And now there is a real, I feel that there is a feeling that is what everyone now sees, and that we have a chance with the UEC and even the influence that the UEC has on other bodies to try and make a positive difference to the way that the football is done in Europe moving forward. 20 years ago, again, I keep saying 20 years, it's not exactly 20 years, it's a period of time in the past. I feel that when people stood and talked about small and medium clubs in Europe, they were really talking about provincial clubs. They were talking in that regard. Whereas today, it feels like when you talk small and medium clubs in Europe, you're essentially talking about any football team that isn't one of the biggest teams in the world, which doesn't make any sense. That shouldn't be how it is. As I said, I'm not going to speak for too long. I'm very excited about this project. I do think that we can really do some good things together. And I think the first thing that occurred to me today was sat listening to people asking questions earlier. There was a guy asking about his team, Bohemians, and the Irish League, and how the Conference League is going to really cause a big problem for the Irish League, because the team that makes it each year is suddenly, we're going to change the associations from the lower associations to become like the higher associations, which is that the same teams win all the time, which no one wants, apart from maybe those teams. But even those teams, I do think, will actually not enjoy the process of being a football fan anywhere near as much if they know at the start of the season they're going to win. That's not what sport is. That's not what we all grew up on. That's not what we're here for. And I had never really considered that, because you live a lot in your own bubble, you live a lot in your own reality. And for the Belgian teams, the Conference League is great because it gives more distribution to more teams. But the problem is, it doesn't help, again, even more of a vast majority of other teams. So I think that the idea of the Conference League was a positive one, but again, Katarina said earlier, you're sort of trying to you're curing the disease rather than trying to fundamentally change things. So I think that when we're all together and when we all listen to each other, we can make big progress, and I'm very excited for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Alex. It's now time to hear from the founders of this project. Probably most of you know who they are. They're going to come up and give a short presentation about the UEC on the launch. It's my honor to, first of all, introduce Katarina Pijetlovic, who I'm sure you all know. She's a professor of EU competition law and sports law and is based at the Catholic University in Lisbon. She's also an author of a book, EU Sports Law and Breakaway Leagues in Football. Katarina is going to be joined by Gareth Farrelly from Ireland. Gareth is a former Premier League player and Irish international. He's also a sports and litigation lawyer and sits as a member of the FA and the Premier League's judicial panel. And finally, we have William Martucci from France. William has over a decade of experience working in sports marketing. He spends a lot of his time providing analysis and recommendations to UEFA on the format of commercial sports and of other club competitions. He was also involved in the development of the Conference League and the format, which is going to be revamped in the Champions League from next season onwards. So, William, welcome to the stage. See you guys. Yeah. So you all pick up a mic and
Is working?
yeah, they should all be working. Sorry about that. My notes were not correct.
No, can you hear me? Maybe you get one. This one should be okay. Okay, is it better now? Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in front of you today to present this project. So I will start by explaining what the UEC is, what our objectives are, what we stand for, before handing over to Katarina and Gareth. The Union of European Clubs is an independent representative body that was founded to improve support and advocacy for non-elite professional football clubs across Europe. If we can move to the slide, a simple way of putting it is to say that we want to fill a gap in the governance of European club football. Currently, clubs who do not regularly play in UEFA club competitions, and that is more than 1,400 clubs, do not have meaningful representation at a European level. This means that their interests are not defended in discussions that lead to decisions that affect them because they affect all professional clubs. We want to provide these clubs with a voice. Now, if we can move to the next slide, I'm happy to confirm that we have 40 clubs attending today this meeting, this event, in the room, coming from 25 different countries. As you can see, countries from across all the UEFA National Association ranking are represented, so very much the whole pyramid. So I want to thank these clubs for being here today. We were originally thinking of doing an event with about 15 clubs, but we had to change the venue because there was more interest. And if we look at the total clubs that registered for this event in person and online, which we will have just on the next slide, that's over 100 clubs that are following this, coming from more than 30 national associations. Now, we believe now is a key moment for such an initiative because of the various threats that are putting the European model of sport at risk. In fact, I think the clubs that are here in the room today, they care a lot about this European model of sport, want to contribute to its protection. Breakaway projects are still alive, very much alive, as you all know. New investment strategies coming from private equity funds, but sovereign funds as well, are reshaping the game, and this is all happening while the effects of the COVID crisis are very much ongoing. So the UEC was founded with a number of key values in mind, which represent principles that we stand for. The first one that relates to the essence of this organization is the principle of democracy. We want to grant voting rights to all European professional clubs when it comes to decisions that affect the future of the game. But beyond the organization itself, we also want to promote democracy, democratic and human rights values within our members and all the stakeholders that take part in the game. Transparency is key for us, as for any organization involved in governance. We want our decision-making process to be as transparent as possible and to fight against any form of corruption. Sustainability and solidarity are at the heart of our initiative. Most of the clubs that are here today in the room and most of the clubs that we want to represent receive solidarity payments. A lot of them also depend on these solidarity payments. So we believe European football can only be sustainable if clubs at the bottom of the pyramid operate in a financially stable environment. And finally, the UEC stands for the social and community value of football. Yes, we acknowledge football is a business on one hand, and clubs doing well commercially should be rewarded, but also there is a cultural aspect in football which is equally important, and this is what it makes. It creates a model that allows fans from all regions of Europe to have a connection with a local club. This is something we care about and we believe we can defend. Now, in order to defend these values, we will work with more specific objectives in mind. The overarching objective of the UEC is to promote a fair, sustainable, and balanced football ecosystem where clubs of all sizes can thrive. This means clubs should be able to move up or down in the hierarchy, both in sporting and financial terms. And this element of mobility, we think, is very important in the European model of sport because it relates directly to the commercial success of football and to how attractive each club can be at a local, national, or international level. This is why we believe the following principles should be protected and enhanced. The importance of domestic leagues as the main pillar of European football, a balanced revenue distribution with solidarity payments towards lower tiers, and the open model itself, so promotion and relegation in domestic leagues, and open access to UEFA club competitions based on results in domestic leagues. The UEC will also aim at helping clubs from smaller markets develop by providing them with tools to maximize their commercial performance and allow them to improve their facilities and strengthen youth academy development. I'll hand over to Katarina now to say a few words about how we plan to achieve these objectives.
Well, thank you and a very warm welcome, and thank you all for being here. Let me first say that this project has been in the making for 2.5 years, and it has been a long journey. So even though you haven't heard of us so far, it is because a lot of background work was done. Going forward, it's also not going to be a quick fix. It's not going to be a 100-meter sprint. It's rather going to be a process, and it's going to be a long-distance run. We are conscious that change will not happen overnight, but the more members we have, it will help us achieve our objective easier and make our job as a union easier. Also, no change will happen without the support, for which we are particularly grateful to several entities that have stepped forward and helped out. For instance, when we were just starting out and needed to deal with things like basics, like office rental, website, emails, logo design, and so on, we got 23,000 euros for these and other administrative costs from a person that has put this group together, plus Dennis. And he is from a small Irish club. Also, we are very grateful to LaLiga for stepping up about a couple of months or so ago and offering their support, which is actually what made this event possible. And I would like other leagues as well to invite them to support similarly this initiative. As to how we are going to achieve and how we plan, what we plan to do, that first of all we have to engage with clubs and visit plenty of them and talk to them and set up an executive board. And so the setting up the board is very first step in the process, because we will take mandate from our club. We'll get specific instructions from them. We will of course have our own agenda to put on the table as well, and our own ideas, but we need clubs to approve or deny it. So for instance, right now, there is a European League initiative, which you probably are aware of, and they are trying to, their proposal involves increasing the distribution of UEFA club competition revenue for non-participating clubs, and I think it's a wonderful idea, and UEC stands behind it 100%, but on the other hand, we also need to put this on the table before executive boards and have clubs have their word on it. So we will receive a mandate from the clubs. It is crucial to grow the membership as well. So there is a power in numbers. The clubs must realize then what their potential representational scope is. And it would make them one of the most powerful lobby group in European football. And as such, they have a potential to be a recognized stakeholder and a social dialogue partner. Some of our members will be bigger than others, perhaps 200 times richer. But what makes the UEC unique is that we give equal importance to all of our members, not just in our speeches and our PR, but also in our government structures, governance structures, our board structures, and in the way that decisions are made. In our board, clubs decide together. There will be 13 clubs initially on that board. And this acknowledges that they are all a part of the same pyramid ecosystem in which all clubs should be given equal opportunities, starting with representation of their interests without subdividing them according to their size and wealth. Next, we need to raise awareness also among clubs, because as we were making this project happen, and we spoke with a lot of clubs, and a lot of them might not really fully realize what their rights are and what their position in ecosystem is. And we need to free the clubs from that mindset that keeps them believing that there is nothing they can do to improve the system or their position in it. This is exactly why they accept the scraps left behind by the elite clubs, of which they get just as much as the elite wants to give them and just as much as necessary to keep them docile. This is all possible because clubs don't realize what an enormous collective power and potential they have if they just unite. Again, William has presented some numbers. We have over 1,000 of potential members. That is a massive, massive union, potentially. So next, we will seek a place on UEFA decision-making boards, and in this context, I must emphasize that UEC is not trying to replace ECA, and Gareth will say more about our relationship with ECA and with all the stakeholders, but we are here to provide a counterbalance to the influence that the lead clubs via ECA have on the rulemaking in European football. So the reason for most of the issues that small and medium-sized professional clubs are facing, they stem from the governance structure in which they have no voice, they have no input and nobody to represent their interests. Everything starts from the governance structures, basically. This is precisely why there is such a big gap between the best and the rest. We will provide professional services to the clubs that are designed specifically for their needs, and it will be one of our priorities when we have taken care of these initial things. We will survey the clubs and conduct studies to understand exactly what the clubs need, what types of professional services they require, and we will provide those to them. Cooperation with the EU institutions is very high on our list. We have already engaged with the European Commission, European Parliament, and the Council of the EU. I must say that when we think of who our closest ideological allies are in terms of our shared objectives, we think of European leagues, UEFA, and EU institutions. But for many years, for decades, in fact, these institutions only heard the side of the football story told from the point of view of elite clubs. They never really heard anybody speak about the small and medium-sized clubs and their position, their issues, and until we actually talked to these institutions. Nobody has had basically interest in explaining that side of the story. And we have now told it. We are in touch with European institutions on a regular basis. The policies of EU institutions strongly support our goals and vice versa, that our goals are actually perfectly aligned with the objectives of EU sports policy. In the beginning, and as we grow our numbers, these institutions will be crucial for our recognition as a social partner, for funding when we develop specific programs, and more generally for political support. We will cooperate with all the football stakeholders, as suggested by Mr. Schinas as well. This has been our, from the very beginning, our strategy is to be non-conflictual and to engage with everybody. And exactly what we have done so far with the football stakeholders, Gareth will tell you that story. Thank you.
Thank you, Katarina. I think I'm going to stand up, not just to make it a little bit easier. Some of you have heard me speak already today. For those that haven't, I'd just like to initially say thank you for all attending. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here today, and also those that are joining online. In some ways, it's quite humbling to be here. To speak the leadership of UEFA and ECA and a number of other stakeholders. We believe that there is a willingness and openness to participate in constructive dialogue, and dialogue that supports their existing organisations. One of the key questions for today in many ways has been the UEC relationship with stakeholders within the football family. So just to give you sort of some kind of guidance with regards to those elements. Firstly, with regards to the relationship with UEFA. The UEC's core values and principles reflect those set out by UEFA in the UEFA strategy 2019 to 2024, which is Together for the Future of Football. We believe that a good relationship with UEFA is exceptionally important, and we believe the organisation can also be a valuable partner for UEFA on matters pertaining to the broader issues in European and international football. By being formally recognised as a body representing the vast majority of clubs, the UEC offers a solution that sits outside the core remit of other organisations in the European football family, providing UEFA with partnerships, a missing piece in the puzzle, if you like, and also be a sounding board on the issues that impact clubs, a supportive voice, equally on key issues, a more informed overview in the current stakeholder influence setting, and sharing information on wider football and social issues, best practices for member clubs, data in creating a fit-for-purpose governance structure. UEFA's creation of a three-tier league structure of European football competition further necessitated an organisation that will adequately represent clubs that do not qualify for the Champions League or Europa League on a regular basis. Establishing an inclusive environment in UEFA governance structures would have the effect of promoting competitive balance on the pitch and financial sustainability of it. The UEC will also, as a point of, with regard to the membership benefit, work closely and collaborate with the UEFA Academy in promoting educational opportunities to help clubs develop further. With regard to the European leagues, the UEC was in fact born out of European Leagues initiative in the form of the Club Advisory Platform. There have been a number of CAP meetings since its first in Madrid in 2019, and the two organisations agree that we share the same objectives and create synergy in addressing the issues of common concern. The UEC believes that domestic leagues and the clubs they're composed of are different stakeholders and require different representative bodies. This is already acknowledged in the existing representative structures of the EC, as the ECA represents clubs that belong to the member leagues of the European leagues. We were in attendance at the General Assembly last week and very much embrace, as Kat alluded to, the joint declaration signed and announced after the General Assembly. We are also hugely grateful for the relationship and counsel provided by European leagues over the last couple of years. We support the formal request for increased revenue distribution for non-participating clubs, and we're well aware that that is at the start of negotiations at this time now. And just for completeness, the European leagues are pushing for 10% in relation to this. With regards to the relationship with ECA, the UEC appreciates the growth of global brand clubs, and that this has driven much of the overall value of UEFA competitions, which are followed by millions of people globally and have significant social, cultural and economic importance. The UEC recognises the ECA as the representative body of those clubs who regularly participate in the UEFA Champions League and sees ECA and the UEC as complementary organisations. Our joint goals include the creation of a more democratic governance model on a European level and the strengthening of all clubs for the benefit of everyone. ECA and the UEC members have different financial structures and business models, both of which deserve separate representation in European football governance. We're hopeful that the two organisations will work together to create a successful platform for cooperation and the exchange of information, knowledge, and most importantly, provide the more wealthy clubs with an awareness, an appreciation and understandings of the wider surroundings they operate in. The ECA can support the UEC in promoting good governance and access to resources for the sustainability and development of clubs across a number of key areas, including the improvement of facilities and youth academy development, which Willem alluded to slightly earlier. The ECA would continue to represent the elite Champions League clubs, but also protect the existence of those clubs who are not members of ECA, recognising these clubs develop players, provide enormous value to their fans and communities, and are fundamental to the preservation of the pyramid structure of European football. With regards to our relationship with FIFPro, as an ex-player, I am a huge advocate of FIFPro and the protection and education of current and former players. It's actually incredible to see Mr. Frankowski here today and demonstrate how a second career can have equal effectiveness and efficiency in the world of football. We've been in dialogue with FIFPro since the start of this project, strengthening and the financial sustainability of small and medium-sized clubs equals better conditions for players, timely salaries, improved career and post-career prospects. The UEC will also act as a valuable social dialogue partner for FIFPro on issues pertaining to player physical and mental health, inclusion and player rights, to include the exploitation of their data rights. As regards relationship with fan organisations, the UEC has met with fan organisations and received strong backing and even some practical assistance for the initiative since its inception. We're fully aligned with the key objectives of these organisations and are confident in cooperation with them in the future as well. To summarise, European football has historically always moved forward on the basis of establishing consensus. The whole evolution of the UEFA stakeholder engagement model is based on seeking accommodation with all the stakeholders. We're grateful for the recent support provided by LaLiga and those small benefactors who contributed during the journey to get to today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Gareth, Kat, and William. So we're going to chew over some of that with a panel discussion. I'm delighted to welcome what I've been called the beating heart of the UEC, which is Denis Gudasic from Croatia. Denis, please take a seat. Denis is the Executive Director of Lokomotiva Zagreb. He's also a graduate of Masters in Sports Governance and a holder of UEFA Certificate in Advanced Sports Management. We also have Steve Parish, a businessman and the co-owner and chairman of Crystal Palace since 2010. Steve, take a seat. And finally, Alex from USG is going to come and join us too. Okay, I'll say at the end. Okay. And make sure you got one each. Okay, we have about 40 minutes for the discussion. Denis, I'm going to kick it off with you. And like as a sort of outside observer, I'm curious to know why it took until 2023 for smaller clubs in Europe to have a platform potentially that they could join to give themselves a seat at the table in this whole conversation around the future of European football.
I think one of the main reasons, thanks for the question. I think one of the main reasons is clubs are so occupied with daily obligations, keeping their clubs alive, keeping the clubs, keep all the duties. So clubs are really focused, and people that work in clubs are focused every day on just keeping the club alive, keeping the club going. And most of the smaller clubs don't have huge resources in terms of administration staff and people, and are just really focused on what they have to do every day. So the overall or global picture or European picture, or where the club is positioned in terms of representation, is not always a key focus of club managers or people involved in clubs.
Is this a sort of tipping point in the debate around the future of smaller clubs? Like, why have we got to this point? What are the factors that have led us here?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the reasons why we are where we are today is because I think mostly because the clubs don't have a say in the decision-making processes. They don't have somebody to represent them, and they don't have somebody to help them along the way.
Steve, as a member of said sort of smaller club, and I don't want to use that in a sort of derogatory way, but I think, as Alex explained, there's such a bifurcation between those who are considered big that by default everyone else that's not in that club is considered smaller. But how do you feel about the representation of smaller clubs? And as someone who's obviously actively involved in managing a Premier League club, the Premier League gets sort of outsized attention in the conversations, I think, around the future of sport. What do you want to see in terms of formats, the numbers of games being played, the ideas about financial sustainability? Like, you've got a couple of minutes. Go and hold court about what you want.
A couple of minutes. Thank you for letting me be here today, by the way. It's a very interesting day. I would say that I would first of all like to remove the smaller club, bigger club. For me, there are just successful clubs currently and aspirational clubs, right? I mean, if you're not in sport unless you're aspirationally successful. So I don't understand this concept of small and big. I mean, you're only big because you've been successful on the pitch for a period of time. If you look back through the history of the top division in England, there are many clubs that aren't successful at the moment that won the league many times over. Then we get into the era of a lot of money, and those certain clubs could build a kind of permanence around being successful on the pitch. So I consider myself part owner of an aspirational club, not a smaller club. And I guess as somebody who supported my club since I was 4, I mean, I'm only in football because I support this football team. I imagined that when I bought the club, that all the problems I would have would be sporting problems, right? So I didn't imagine that most of the battles that I would need to win were not actually on the pitch. I thought that I was becoming part of a meritocracy, and that UEFA and FIFA were the guardians of that meritocracy, and there was a level playing field of some kind where we all started a season with some kind of chance of levelling up, if you like, to a new level. And we still see beautiful stories in football. We saw Wrexham being promoted back to the Football League in England, funded by some, Hollywood movie stars, but very much becoming part of the community and understanding the team. We see Alkmaar, we see your team, competing in Europe. So we see beautiful stories all the time around, but it feels like there's an attempt to stamp those stories out. It feels like any aspiration is very much frowned upon, belittled. They love this term small clubs. I think we need to stop using it about ourselves because, I don't consider myself a small club. I consider myself a club that are trying to aspire to get into Europe and to win things. So what the answers are, I don't know. And I understand that people think that we're all very blessed in the Premier League with money. But obviously, the money is only relative to the spend of the people around you. And as we all know, collectively last year, the Premier League lost somewhere around 700 million. We spent 1.9 billion net in a season overseas. The bottom 9 clubs spent 900 million on transfers. And it's almost impossible to qualify for Europe if you're outside of one of those coefficiently fortunate clubs who manage to find ways to create rules that make it more and more difficult for us to aspirationally succeed. So I don't know all the answers, but I think that we need a different voice, or a voice, as everybody has said around the table, and I'm hopeful that this organisation will be a start of that and a platform where we can at least be considered. Because I understand all of the arguments, and every club looks through their own lens, and everybody has a different viewpoint of football and their own problems, and that the currently successful clubs drive a lot of value currently in the market. So we need to listen to everybody, I get that, but at the moment I don't think we are. So I think this is an important first step towards that.
Will Palace join the UEC? Have they said formally they will be involved? And will you be involved in maybe lobbying some of your fellow Premier League owners to do the same?
Well, we have some Premier League owners and chief execs here today. I think today was about coming to see what it was about and meet everybody and see the scale of the opportunity and to understand it. So it's definitely something we're extremely open to. We do feel we aren't represented anywhere at European level. We lack a voice, and we accept that we're only one voice, but we feel that we should be heard. So it's certainly something we're very interested in.
Alex, you mentioned in your opening remarks that that the experience of USG is still rare. And is it a bit of a problem that sometimes your club is maybe held up as like a poster club for when things go right, that some of those dreams can still come true, that a club that was maybe fighting for its existence can become, such a prominent team in its own country and also be representing in Europe? Like, is there a problem that sometimes clubs that do well are used as arguments not to change the system because clearly it's working if we do get examples like Union?
Yeah, I can see why you would say that. As Steve referenced, there are plenty of good stories out there. I just feel that they're not maybe covered in the same way that the bigger ones are. And you hear an argument that I've heard given before is that, when you look at it seems somewhat spurious sometimes to hear it, but when you hear the FIFA computer game, they do a table of who all of the kids are choosing to play as, and I find it quite ridiculous that it's given as an argument that they drive all of the revenue. They're the teams that all the kids want to play as. Well, there's two good reasons. One is because they're really good on the game, so everyone wants to play as the good teams. But two is because they've actively closed out other people over a long period of time and slowly grown to a point where they're the team. They are dominating too much. And as look, we've spoken about it a lot today, the ECA is dominated by the bigger teams, and the voice is just not quite there. And that's what I believe Dennis and Gareth and Katarina are hoping will be UEC.
What are the most iniquitous parts of what's going on? Like, give us an insight about what it's like to run, a non-traditional team which is doing very well. What are the sort of barriers that you face, either at a Belgian level or a European level? Things that you didn't expect before you came into this profession.
It's challenging because as a club you have to do the best with what you've got, and I think that's part of what we've been talking about. The reason you asked Dennis why it's taken so long for this sort of thing to happen is because you're focused on your own problems a lot of the time rather than everyone else's. I mean, the distribution of the non-European money is something that I feel non-European teams needs to be discussed more. I think that the way that leagues, I worry that the top divisions for a little while have been dominated by the same teams, the Bayerns, the Paris Saint-Germains, etc. And now potentially you've seen with Champions League money being given to the coefficient leagues 6 through 10, the automatic qualification to the Champions League. You're ending up with those leagues now being dominated by the same teams over and over again, and are concerned that potentially with the changes in the Conference League, with the changes in the Europa League, that you could see that going around all of the leagues in Europe. And it's. You asked about the challenges. The league that we're in, there is a team that's been very successful, and I'm not complaining they've been successful. They've done a very good job in what they've done. But by qualifying for the Champions League, growing their coefficient year on year on year, receiving the Champions League money year on year on year, they were able to play in a different playground to everyone else in terms of salaries, in terms of transfer fees. And the concern that I think that people would have is that if we keep letting this happen, at some point it will be irreversible. The teams that have become large this way, too big to fail is obviously a cliche used in the other way, but they're becoming slightly too big to fail. They can't, if they keep receiving this revenue on an annual basis, they just close out the leagues.
Dennis?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, in reference to solidarity, its importance. It's obviously important for countries or underdeveloped countries and underdeveloped leagues like where I come from Lokomotiva Zagreb. But if we consider that this year Paris Saint-Germain earnings in the group phase of the Champions League almost equal the same amount that is distributed to 600 clubs in Europe, then we can obviously see that with that sort of system in place, even slightest adjustments to Paris Saint-Germain's earnings would provide so many benefits to 600 clubs who are on the receiving end of solidarity. And the differences sort of also relate to even clubs who should be considered to be on the same level. If you look at this year's, for example, Champions League revenue in the group phase, you have a strange situation where Shakhtar Donetsk, they earned this season in the group stage 42 million euros. They earned 6 points in the group stage, and Atletico Madrid, they achieved 1 point less than Shakhtar Donetsk, yet Atletico Madrid earned 23 million euros more than Shakhtar Donetsk. So the problem we have is we're not valuing sporting results. Even in the case of the two German clubs, we have Frankfurt Eintracht and Borussia Dortmund. They're competing in the same competition. They come from the same league. Eintracht Frankfurt achieved 1 point more than Borussia Dortmund, and yet they received 22 million euros less, only because they are not, or they don't receive any benefits according to the so-called historical coefficient part of the money that's distributed. So how is it logical? They come from the same market, they compete in a European competition, one club earns 1 point more and yet earns 22 million euros less. And the the same problem we have in revenue distribution, and it also reflects how clubs are able to compete, because UEFA has distributed in the last 25 years, they've distributed more than 22 million euros in revenue. And of this 22 billion, sorry if I said million instead of billion, they've distributed 22 billion euros in revenue, and 34% was received by 12 clubs. 34% of this 22 billion was received by 12 clubs, and 11 billion euros was 54% of this money was received by 20 clubs. And this is what's keeping these clubs at that level where they are, and it's also preventing the clubs below them, as Steve was saying, aspiring to achieve better sporting results.
How would the UEC change this? Would you lobby to maybe wipe out the coefficient, to stop punishing new entrants? What's your solution?
The solution is, I think we have to value sporting merit and sporting results more. The system isn't good at the moment, and it certainly, I think, wasn't the intention of UEFA when they created these competitions. It certainly wasn't their intention to create these huge gaps and shore up the positions of a few clubs and not allow access to those clubs below them. But I think what we have now is purely and solely the result of pressures which have been coming from the league clubs over the last 15 years for more and more and a bigger portion of the revenue, with no concern for those clubs who are below them.
Steve, we hear a lot from maybe bigger, more lucrative clubs that actually they spend a lot of money in the trickle-down process, that yes, they make lots of money, but they also are, because they're so wealthy, they're able to redistribute that down to the football pyramid. How does that work in the Premier League, and does it work really in practice at all?
Well, I think in terms of the English football system, there is a good trickle down to the pyramid. There's about 17% of the Premier League's revenue is trickled down to the pyramid, which compares with about 5% of UEFA's revenue, I think, that goes down. That will increase undoubtedly because of the pressure that we're under, and there's a new deal for football in England, and it's the right thing to do. So Championship clubs in League One and League Two clubs will receive increased funding from the Premier League, probably somewhere in the region of 20+% of the overall revenue that the Premier League receives. But I think there's a mismatch in Europe. And I think going back to Dennis's point, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but for us, we accept that if you're consistently successful, then your commercial revenues will rise. But that is why your commercial revenues have grown. That is why you have better players on FIFA. That is why kids want to play more, because you're consistently successful in season. And you accepted that when you came into the game. I think the coefficient is the real poster child for the gerrymandering of the competition. You know, when you get into a situation where we all face jeopardy. So, you know, in the Premier League, your jeopardy is relegation. The relegation from the Premier League is probably the biggest financial jeopardy in football around the world, I would imagine. If you look at our turnover, probably in the Premier League, somewhere in the region of 175 million. First season in the Championship would be about 70 million. So there's no amount of salary cuts in players that you can bake in to cover that kind of a loss. And then actually the third year is pretty bad. By the fourth year, you're probably somewhere down to 20 million. So somehow in 3 years, you have to work it out to come from 178 down to 20. Equally, if you fall out of the Champions League, then you have the same issue. I understand that, but it's less of an issue, right? Because you still have these gargantuan commercial revenues. You have the revenues of your local leagues, and the solution for that somehow you get this increased money when you play in the league above everybody else, based on not your in-season ability, but over 5 years or 10 years, and then the thing that they were trying to achieve before the Super League aborted it, which was actually to gerrymander qualification itself. So in the Premier League, we were going to have this leapfrogging concept where if you finished 7th, you could leapfrog the team in 5th because you had a 5-year coefficient. I think for most of us, once people start introducing these kind of concepts, then we really think this is not a level playing field, right? All concepts of fairness is going out the window. And I think for this organisation, the European leagues, I think, should be commended. They've done a sterling job of trying to represent us, but they have such a huge amount of issues to try and represent. And they're at one voice against the counterbalance of two teams that were actually at the heart of UEFA on their exco, and a whole body in the ECA, which primarily represents about 20 teams, really, is its primary objective. So, and because there's no way, it seems to me, that the rest of those teams in the ECA would have voted for a system where teams could leapfrog others. In fact, I know teams that were in the ECA that were the teams that might have been leapfrogged, and they were very much against it. So clearly there's a lack of representation, because I think for most of us, these ideas of out-of-season merit, of 5-year coefficients, 10-year coefficients, really are the beginning of the straw that starts to look like it might break the camel's back, and build in a permanence that then we can never challenge, which would be hugely damaging, because as I say to these big clubs, maybe we're all delusional. Maybe we'll never get there. Maybe actually the best we can hope for is one amazing season or two amazing seasons. But you know what? That is enough. That is the little piece of flame that keeps the dream alive. That is what pours money into football, makes communities believe, actually connects football fans to the Champions League. It's why they watch the top leagues, because they feel in some way their team is connected to it. Maybe one day there's a dream, somebody could come along, invest enough, and they could get there. They could be playing by Leverkusen. They could have 15,000 people. I went to your stadium a minute ago in a tiny street. It seems incredible that you get that many people in there. But how exciting for that club, you know, that had 500 people, you were saying, in the lower league. So, you know, we need to keep these dreams alive, because otherwise the whole ecosystem collapses.
We're obviously here talking about a more European enterprise, but there are also attempts at national levels to improve governance around football. In the UK, we have a process ongoing with various white papers. How do you see any of those potential proposals interact with what you're trying to achieve, or what the ECA might be what the UEC might be trying to achieve?
Well, look, I think the government in England are well-intentioned in the things that they're trying to do. I think the problem is that the regulator has been encouraged by one very narrow focus. And I think that's what we're talking about today is, you know, people create rules, or have ideas, or create directions out of the influences that surround them, right? We all feel, I think, that the influences that currently surround our governing body of our game are too narrow and are too driven by one group. And I think this is the danger of you have a focal point of a government regulator involved. You know, how do they make a decision? How do they decide what's fair? Do they actually understand the complexity of the football ecosystem? How many different views there are? How many different layers there are? How many views you have to represent in order to try and get to a fair system? So, you know, I think there's some benefits in the process that's going on, but equally it's a little bit concerning, because when you have governments involved, things become politicised. So, for example, we've seen some emails between the government from a Freedom of Information Act around the Newcastle takeover, where it seems that there was some connection between massive investment into Britain from a certain area of the world and linked to buying that football club. Now, personally, for me, if you allow one nation state to buy a football club, you have to allow others to buy a football club. I personally didn't have an objection to it in that context, but it does seem that there was some pressure placed on the government to allow that through. And I think that certainly for us, it's dangerous enough with all the politics we have in sport without real politics entering into it, and we have nation states and governments deciding on what is fair and what is right and wrong for football. So that side of things is slightly concerning. Hopefully we can manage the regulator's influence and keep it quite focused and quite narrow, but we'll see where it lands.
Alex, one of the sort of unique parts of USG is that you're in a sort of, I don't know if it's the technical term, but a sort of franchise with your relationship with Brighton and the ownership of Brighton. Is that, other big clubs have spoken about it, but sometimes it seems quite patronising when bigger clubs say they want to basically have feeder or smaller clubs around Europe. But how does that relationship work with the union? And is that a potential model to allow non-traditional clubs across Europe to maybe gain a bit more financial support if they have slightly more lucrative, well-known backers in other leagues?
Sure.
Well, I don't want to take over with like Union Brighton chat, but the thing with Union and Brighton is that the major investor is the same in both, but he's passive at Union, he's active at Brighton, which is very different to a lot of the other models that are going around Europe, I would say, where there is there's a top layer team and then everyone else feeds in. If we were trying to feed in, we'd be pretty useless with our very different styles and mid-20s average age. But that's not really the point of driving it, I don't think. Look, for me, I just think as long as a club's history, a club's fan base, a club's community feel is respected and maintained, then personally I'm open to any sort of ownership. I really detest and dislike the idea that a club can be taken over and made to change its history, made to change its colours, made to change its community, made to change its way of being just because someone buys it. I don't think that should be possible in sport, personally. You can do that in other businesses if you want, but you don't have 20,000 people turning up to a toilet roll factory complaining about the way it's being run. So it's just a different thing for me.
One of the maybe unhappy consequences of your success is that there is a prohibition that UEFA have about teams having a similar ownership, be it passive or active, not being able to compete in the same European platform. Is that something that you think you would like to lobby to change or try and find loopholes? I know that the Leipzig, Salzburg, they did find some sort of way to sort of get around this, but do you foresee that being an issue in the future? Well, for me, it always has to come down to the fact that you want a fair game. That's the thing that matters. And we are run completely, the two clubs are run completely separately. And if we were to play Brighton in Europe next season, then I would probably want to win that game more than any other game I've ever wanted to win. And I'm sure everyone at Union would as well. And as long as you have that, I don't think you have any problems. Dennis, we've heard from yourself and the founders behind UEC that you want to be a sort of constructive and conciliatory force, but it seems that even by creating the platform, it is a pretty disruptive act, and you may have to be pretty disruptive to try and get your voice heard. So how do you see this? If we were here in about a year or 2 years' time, what would success for the UEC look like?
Well, firstly, I have to say, and we discussed, been speaking to the clubs, we've been speaking amongst ourselves this morning. We've just met, We have 40 clubs here today. We've just met, and the discussion in this short period of time, from the morning until now, it's been quite intense because you can notice and you can see that the clubs have been looking forward to this opportunity to interact, to be together in the same room and to start something new. That's the biggest takeaway. And we can see that there is a lot of energy amongst the people who are attending this meeting, who are attending this event, because they realise that of all the topics we've discussed today, the key thing for us should be that we have to have our voice heard in the decision-making processes. And where I would like and where I think would be reasonable to expect that we are in 2 years' time, we would like to be in the stakeholder table. We would like to be at the table when decisions are made. We deserve to be, and not based on some sort of level of privileges that certain members have, others don't have. We want the UEC to be, and it will be, an organisation that gives every club equal rights, but where the smaller clubs like Lokomotiva will look up to clubs like Union and Crystal Palace and look up to them, but at the same time they won't be looking down on us. So we work together. We appreciate the value that the bigger clubs bring to football, and they appreciate the extremely important value that smaller clubs, and I don't like to use this term, I agree with Steve, smaller clubs, but those less developed clubs, let's say, bring to football in terms of their contribution in community value, in the development of players. And solidarity is not just a financial tool. Solidarity should be something that we refer to as a tool in which we provide adequate value for those clubs who are producing value in terms of player development, in terms of community value, and all the other things that the clubs bring to football.
fundamentally, I feel that when Gareth and Katarina and Dennis have been asked, what are the main priorities, the answer's been, well, what are the club's priorities? And I find it very interesting to think that, in theory, if this organisation grows, and there are hundreds of clubs from around Europe, from around the smaller leagues, from around the medium leagues, even from the bigger leagues, I don't have a great feel myself for what the majority, number one, hot issue would be among all of those teams on a one club, one vote basis, which is quite incredible, really. You would think that it would be obvious. You would think that it would have been discussed before. You would have thought that there would have been a body before. The more I've spent time talking to Gareth and thinking about this organisation, I've thought, while it is incredible that it doesn't exist, it is also entirely believable because of the way that everything has been set up and constructed in the past. But look, I think we can be very optimistic that if we can convince, if the UEC can convince enough people to join this, then we can really find out what the issues are and provide, I know we keep saying seat at the table, but it's real, it exists. There is, at the moment, a small number of teams that are the vast majority of the voice. And when you think about how the ECA has been constructed, to me, there's no criticism whatsoever of the ECA and the way that it's worked. It's just been a natural evolution, a natural way that it's occurred. The problem is that without someone taking action like these three people have, it would never stop. And it needs a counterbalance, and this can be it.
Steve, we often hear that even though the Super League, as it's been conceived, may not succeed, that there is a Super League in European football, and it's the Premier League, and that's because of the level of riches involved in the league. To some degree, is the Premier League a sort of bespoke, a sort of slight anomaly when it comes to the landscape of European football? Like, when you sit around the table with your fellow owners, do you have a certain, unique set of grievances that maybe cannot be replicated in other European leagues because of the financial, discrepancies that the English Football League has with everyone else?
Honestly, I mean, I went to the European Leagues meeting a few years back. Javier spoke very well. And even in that meeting, I understood a little bit more about other people's problems, right? So, honestly, I didn't understand that Legia Warsaw, in a country of 40 million people, win their league, and they have to pre-qualify in the summer for the Champions League. I remember when I was a kid, the Champions League was the champions of all the European leagues, right? Not 4 teams from the Premier League, and then Ajax pre-qualifying in the summer, which seems extraordinary to me that there's somebody that's the guardian of the game. I mean, if you look at international football has developed well, right? With the aim for FIFA of getting more and more countries involved in it because it creates more interest and generates more income. So you see, in a World Cup, although we broadly have the same teams just about winning, it's much more competitive in terms of international football. Every international side, Macedonia knocked Italy out of World Cup qualification. You have really genuine situations where countries are laddering up and improving. So it's hard for me to totally understand everybody else's problems. The Premier League doesn't seem like this panacea when you're in it, right? It doesn't seem like we're in heaven and everybody else is in some kind of footballing hell, because, as I said, the money's all relative. We lost £40 million last year. We lost £24 million this year. We spent £40 million on transfers, which is the second biggest in our history in a season, and that was the lowest spend in the Premier League. As I said, we collectively lose £700 million. We've got 6, now probably 7 teams where, capital is the amount of capital they have is either unlimited or is enormous compared to us. And qualifying for European football is almost impossible. Maybe the Conference League is possible. So again, everybody looks at it through their own lens. I'm not saying that it's bad to be in the Premier League by any means. And I'm sure if I understood more of people's problems, I would understand just how lucky probably we are. But equally, it still doesn't feel like a meritocracy entirely. And with the coefficient, it feels like more and more there's a 2-speed Premier League. There's a top half and a bottom half. and that disparity will get bigger and bigger and bigger unless we put some rules in to try and control it. So I really need to understand more, and I hope that I am somebody who loves football and cares about football and understands that, you know, which I think sometimes these teams really don't. This is my problem. We're currently talking about the women's game, and in the women's game in England, fundamentally, you have a Super League, right? It was built from the top down. You have a very successful international team, and you have 4 teams. Let me give you how the women's team in England works. Last season in the WSL 1, the top 4 teams' goal difference was plus 179, and the rest of the teams was minus 178. One team had a goal difference of plus 1. So there's no salary cap. It's unfettered spending. You know, you can spend. There is a salary cap, but there's no turnover limit, so you can spend what you want. And when you talk to them, these teams that are successful in it, and they all want change because it's costing them lots of money, but you say, okay, we need a salary cap. You know, you need to understand that other people have to beat you. That is the change that we need. I'm not sure we want that change. So this is really what you're up against. You know, I think you're up against the situation where people have become so entitled with winning, literally entitled with winning, that they don't accept any system which challenges the status quo or threatens that. And I think that's what we've really got to look at across Europe. And for me, it means I need to understand a lot more of other people's problems.
Dennis, just on this point of the pushback, the chairman of PSG, Nasser Al-Khelaifi, said that he was worried or concerned that the UEC might become the next A22, a reference to the founders of the Super League. How do you feel about the fact that maybe, you know, some of the big players in European football governance and club ownership are already maybe besmirching you, and are you sort of anticipating quite a tough blowback in the next coming months?
I'll ask the people here, is anyone here in favour of, are we A22 or are we Super League people? I don't think any of us, it's actually quite funny when we heard this statement. No, we're quite the opposite. And look, we just want a seat at the table. We feel that there is, you know, 700 clubs from first divisions not represented. There are another 500 or 600 clubs in the second divisions, professional clubs, that are not represented. If anybody did or wanted to project us as being, let's say, conflictual in any way in regards to that, they would only be able to tell this story only once, because it's obvious. Everyone that's sitting here today, that's not our story. Our story is not about breakaways, and our story is about unity, about bringing clubs together, and about being able to represent 1,400 professional clubs in Europe. That's what our story is, nothing else.
We just got a couple of minutes. Alex and Steve, I'm just going to ask you sort of a journalistic question. If you were to be put in charge of UEFA or the football governance tomorrow, and there's one thing that you would want to fix or get rid of, what would it be?
I thought Steve did a good job of saying how the Premier League does distribute a lot of its revenue to non-participating teams. And from my point of view, I would probably like to see a much higher percentage than 10 go to the non-participating teams.
That's in Belgium?
No, just that'll be across Europe. And I think, I mean, this is just you asked me my opinion rather than anything UEC related. I would like to see the distribution of that money linked a bit more to the how well the club is run financially, and also potentially how many players it brings through and how many players that they play in their games that they have developed. I think that would be a healthier way to distribute the money. I'm not saying 100%, but it linked in some way in that regard. I think that would probably be the thing that I would want to change. But also, I'm talking much higher percentage than 10, because I just feel that the biggest problem in European leagues, in my opinion, at the moment, is just simply the way that the same teams are winning a lot of different leagues, and how I feel that is spreading to other leagues. And the only way you can really counter that is to make sure that not all of the money that is distributed by UEFA is going to just the participating team.
Steve, if you had to wave your magic wand.
Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, I think it's very difficult to have a situation where a governing body and a regulator organise tournaments that compete with you. I mean, that seems a very difficult situation to manage. I would agree with Alex in terms of, I mean, certainly the Premier League doesn't need more money from any, I'd accept that we don't need more solidarity money for us. So when I say European competition should spread more money, certainly the distortion of some of the smaller leagues is extreme when some of the teams qualify for Europe. But even in the Premier League, the Premier League distribute its media money down, but the Champions League money doesn't, right? That just stays exactly in the Champions League and creates a cliff edge. So I just think the whole governance really needs to be looked at. And, although none of us likes the concept of the Super League in the lack of qualification, I do believe there needs to be a bigger separation of church and state, if you like. That the people organising the tournaments and the people regulating them and taxing those tournaments for the greater good of the team should be two different people. I think that being one body seems a massive conflict of interest.
So your magic wand request is to sort of root and branch change the entire way that the regulators' hybrid role is constructed. I mean, a lot of people are very comfortable with this hybrid role, and maybe that's just because it's always been the way it is. But it is relatively unprecedented if you think about how other, public interest things, which football is governed.
Yeah, and of course in England, that's exactly what the government is saying, right? So the government is saying even we have the FA who don't really organise a competition that competes with us. They don't feel have done a good enough job in regulating the game. That may or may not be the case. I'm not commenting on that, but they obviously feel that, or they wouldn't want to put an independent regulator in. At the top of the game, we have, organisations that organises tournaments that compete with our calendar, competing directly for media money with all of us. And now we have a global governing body who want to organise a tournament that is going to compete for revenue and will distort the competition with revenue. It's just very difficult to understand how that can ever work fairly for people.
Dennis, I'll give you the final word. We've got a couple of minutes. Maybe you can use it as a sort of pitch to the sorted audience in the room and also anyone watching online about why they should sign up.
We had a meeting this morning with the clubs. I think the message was clear. I think we explained to the clubs what the UEC is about. We explained the steps going forward. And we think that clubs should join the UEC because every club should be represented somewhere. They're currently not, so the UEC is the ideal opportunity to have somebody represent you and your interest as a club on a European level and otherwise. The UEC is here because there are a lot of problems in football. We can't solve everything, but if we work together, we can address things like sporting merit, make sure that it's embedded in the structures of competitions and the rewards for sporting merit and sporting results come. There are issues relating to solidarity, and we think they can be further improved, just like Alex said. Yeah, and in the coming period, we'll be approaching clubs, we'll be speaking to clubs, we'll be building our membership, and hopefully towards the end of the year we'll have a general assembly, and which will be attended by a large number of clubs, and that will be the next phase or the next step of our development. But we're certainly moving forward, and based on today's meeting and the feedback from clubs, we've been encouraged very much by the clubs to move forward as they have recognised the need for an organisation like us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I'll give you a round of applause as we get our new guest on. Okay, now it's time for our final speaker, who's also going to close up the program for us. I guess, I'm not sure if he's the keynote, but he's probably a lot of the reason why many people are also here. It's my honor to welcome Javier Tebas, the president of LaLiga, to the stage. Mr. Tebas has worked for 11 LaLiga clubs, and he's been running the two Spanish leagues for nearly a decade. He is going to be speaking in Spanish, so if you want to get your headsets ready, then I would like to welcome Mr. Tebas to the stage. I'll give you one of these.
Sí. No. Vamos, sí.
Okay, can you hear me? This is the English version on channel 1. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we've had a few hours which were very intense to continue to learn things, because even Paris was listening to all these different people, and I've learned a lot. And as Mr. Poe said, this is very complicated, and it's really difficult to understand some of these issues. But I think today's a very important day for European football. And first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me and the effort that's been putting in to create this new Union of European Clubs for football clubs in Europe. Well, I'm going to speak with different hats. And first of all, with my hat as a club, because I was a club for many years. I have been a club, and I repeat this often, but it's because I ran or owned a 4th division club in Spain from my city for 5 seasons. I was the head of the football club in my city, which was in the 4th division. I've been selling tickets. I've been taking the players along in my car, even painted the touchlines for 5 seasons. And then I owned a football club, which if my wife had found out, she would have killed me, all the money that I spent investing in football. And it was a team that was in 2nd division in the Spanish league, where you came to the end of the season, and the 3 last match days, we were playing absolutely everything we put in that season. And I suffered, and I thought, wow, financially, I could be ruined if we lose. And in Spanish football, I represented clubs who are normally the smaller and the medium-sized. Or was it inspirational clubs, as Mr. Parish said? Aspirational clubs. So it's allowed me to understand a full view of football. And so that was when I had my club hat on. And now for the last 10 years, I've been the president of the Professional Football League in Spain. So with all respect, I am not a McKinsey consultant, nor am I CEO of a TV company. No, I'm a man who comes really from football. But I'm someone who wants to understand. I want to ensure that the football ecosystem in Europe and in Spain, well, I think we've managed to achieve this, but we want to have a sustainable system in Europe. As a club, I would like to sort of think about very important things and remember them. Today, we're talking about the fact that the majority of clubs in Europe are the clubs who don't play in European competitions, or, I think the majority of European clubs don't participate in the UEFA club competitions. And we have to remember in the majority of these clubs, 95% of non-professional football of those clubs, we have the under-12s, the under-14, the under-16 groups. 95% of those teams are part of these teams that don't play in European Cup competitions. And then we have the elite clubs, the top-tier clubs. Yes, they still have the under-12 and the under-14, but it's only 5%, no more than that. The rest of them are the clubs that don't play in Europe, or that maybe once in a lifetime do play in Europe. So what's happening to these clubs? European football is now gradually becoming destructured. The Super League wanted to destructure it quickly with a model that was going very, very fast. But there are others, in this particular case, I think it's the ECA, who are destructuring it gradually. And if we don't have a reaction from these other clubs who don't go to Europe or only go once in a lifetime, football will end up in the local domestic leagues, and it will be totally destructured. And this is why I'm talking about a club, and I'm really worried about this. And I'm worried that today, or in fact for the last few years, decisions are made in the European environment that affect our domestic competitions, and they affect the clubs that don't compete in European club competitions or just from time to time. And this has been happening now for quite a few years. And from the European leagues, in my opinion, or we haven't wanted to intervene with the necessary force, or we think that that's not what we should be doing, which is what other people think about these European leagues. But I think the truth is that we haven't done it anyway. We have been giving way gradually for European football to be destructured. And of course, this affects our domestic leagues. It's been very well explained that the clubs who compete in Europe, they receive so much money that when they compete in domestic competitions, there's a big financial difference between them, and that happens all the time. But I don't think it's the time now to say, hey, let's believe in this Association of European clubs, because what? The ECA hasn't solved this problem. And I have been a member, or should we belong? The league still belongs to these European leagues, and will still be a member of European leagues until the 3rd of June. And this is one of the reasons why Spain is leaving, because we don't think that's the way how we can solve the problem. Also, I have to clarify something which is related to the press. I will not be the president of the Union of European Clubs. I would never president. I'm 60 years old. I want to retire, and I end my professional life at LaLiga. And people have been saying that I want to be the president of European leagues, but that isn't true. But this association represents the values, and I think it needs to explain how European football should be in the future. So they say what? European football? I'm now not talking so much as a club, but we have to think that this destructuring that has arrived to the National League is also destructuring European football as far as governance is concerned. Why? So many decisions have been made that affect our national competitions without taking into account the national clubs who don't compete in European competitions, or only very rarely. But lots of decisions have been made. 2016, a reduction of a lot of leagues, the clubs who are here, they had no access to Europe, or much more limited access to Europe. They were asked, the clubs were asked, and we said these aspirational clubs. Were they asked? No, they weren't. Also, we're talking about the destructuring on the financial level. This has already been explained, and I'm not going to go into greater depth about this. But the fact that the clubs who compete in European competitions, it doesn't matter if it's even the Conference League, or the Europa League, or the Champions League, each one at their different level. The clubs that compete in the Conference League, from small leagues, they end up having a big financial difference between that club and the rest of the clubs at their level. So we need to find a solution to all this. We need a solution for all this. In the current structures for football, there are organizations that can provide that solution with the UEFA. Well, I've explained it. I think that European leagues can't do that, because if they haven't done it in 10 years, who says they're going to do it in the future? I don't think they will. I think that the European leagues, and I can include myself, we defend the competition, we defend the international match calendars, and also we try to defend solidarity. But the concept of try to make sure that the clubs who don't go to European, or they only occasionally compete in European competitions. So solidarity isn't just 10 or 15%. I think the concept is a lot broader, and I think this is very important. But the important thing is, how do we distribute that? Who makes decisions related to solidarity? Who makes the decisions related to competition formats? So this is a lot bigger problem. but we are not dealing with it correctly. So therefore, I think that this association, the UEC, is very important. Why? To try and structure European football. Isn't just the mission of the different leagues, but also it's not the mission of the ECA. I'd like to rule out European leagues. I'd like to rule out the ECA. Well, the ECA represents European clubs. Well, I'm fed up with hearing, no, we represent the European clubs. You know, they have a meeting with Infantino, but that isn't true. Or they can even have meetings with the European Union. That's not true. ECA doesn't represent European clubs. They represent the elite clubs in Europe. That's quite interesting today. The Vice President of the European Commission said something that I really liked, but I'd like to analyze it. She said the ECA, in the last conference, they have made steps to changing governance. And that sounds good initially. Yeah, that phrase sounds good, but let's analyze that. If they've made steps forward, it's because for a lot of years, they haven't made any steps forward. So now, if in the year 2023, since they were founded in 2008, you know, this wasn't part of their governance rules. But it says they've made a few steps. It didn't say they've achieved these steps, but they have made certain steps. So when you analyze the steps forward, is the ECA open? Yes. What for? For coffee, tea, and Coca-Cola. Is the ECA open? Not to vote, not for decision-making, and not to open the access. It's open to go to the ECA conferences, of course, in fantastic hotels, great dinners, great speeches, but not to be able to go and vote and not to be able to make decisions, which is what is really necessary. In the leagues, one club, one vote. And the small, the medium, and the big clubs have one vote. We don't have statutes so that a series of clubs can dominate the board. And, you know, recently, I thought about asking, is there going to be elections for the ECA presidency in September? And it wasn't because I was going to, you know, present myself, you know, but it was already decided who was going to be the ECA. So it is a legal maze, or labyrinth. So, you know, a democratic and transparent voting is needed, but it's not like that because indirectly 11 clubs make the decision, you know, and 11 elite clubs. So therefore, the ECA, from what I say, look at European leagues, they're not correct, they're not prepared for different reasons, obviously, to solve the issues we have at hand. So in these institutions, we need to make everything more democratic. And what today, in the year 2023, what is a football organization, you have to change things because otherwise it's not going to work. For example, in European leagues, the Spanish league, LaLiga, is leaving. We've decided to abandon European leagues on the 30th of June, but we've explained why. On the board, they have permanent seats. The big leagues have permanent seats. The seats need to be agreed on by everyone, by the assembly. So if we want to have a league, well, we will have to fight to get a seat on the board with the small and medium-sized leagues, but not because we're more attractive, more taller, or have got more money. You know, we don't need to have permanent seats on the board, and that's the same with the ECA. These sort of situations should change. And this association, in my opinion, brings new ideas, new way of governance in Europe. Because, you know, this is the part that has been outside European football, because the clubs that haven't participated in European competition are those that only participate from time to time. But even those who often compete, they still have a space, because the first problem that needs to be solved, in my opinion, in European football, and I think that this new association can help, because we need to solve governance. When we talk about all these problems, but before anything, I think the first problem to be solved is governance. If we solve the governance problem, we will be solving a lot more problems too. Because if we don't solve the governance problem, there are a lot of people that will affect the status quo, or those who never play in Europe only sometimes. The problems won't be solved if we maintain the status quo, because that is not on the roadmap that has been set. So for that very reason, personally, I will try that LaLiga supports as much as possible this new Union of European Countries. We don't want to intervene, we don't want to lead, or we realize that it is necessary for this association to be part of European football, because European leagues haven't been able to solve the problem, and the EC way is not the way forward to solve it. And I think also that that change should be done within the ECA, but obviously they have to change a lot of things related to governance. But today the most important thing is that you, your profile of clubs, people pay attention to you, people listen to you, and for that, this organization needs to have voice and power. And they were just a few words that I wanted to say, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tebas. I think that was a quite an interesting note to end with. A bit of housekeeping for the members of the press. I'd invite you to stay in your chairs because the press conference will be held. And everyone else, if I could politely, once we wrap up, ask you to leave the room, and hopefully maybe you can mingle outside. My final task is to thank the organisers, to thank Kat, to thank Dennis, to thank William and Gareth for organising the event, for having me. Thank you all for turning up. I think it's going to be an interesting few months, and we're all going to watch how the UEC develops. And there is also a meeting with the clubs in 30 minutes, which you didn't know about, so you do have an incentive to stick around. So thank you very much for coming, and hopefully we'll see many of you soon. Thank you.